Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your host, and I am so excited to be kicking off Food Allergy Awareness and Celiac Disease Awareness Month, the whole month of May. So that's what the topics are going to be all month long. And this lady here, right there, Shannon D'Souza, she is an award-winning entrepreneur and sales coach with 10 years of software sales experience and 8+ years of multi-six-figure earnings in entrepreneurship. Shannon has helped more than 400 clients grow their business and meet their sales goals. And hello, my friend.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. And so everybody, we're going to talk about sales and how you can use her tips and tricks to grow your sales around this. But I want to talk to Shannon about something that she brought to the table a couple of weeks ago. And Shannon, you hosted a sales coaching retreat and 80% of your attendees had dietary needs.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So I hosted a retreat in Sedona. It was called Abundant and Wealthy as Fuck. And it was really all around like calling in the energy, right, of sales. And part of this experience, it was meant to be very luxurious. We brought in a private chef. 80% of my attendees had dietary needs. And all I could think about was you. And can you imagine if I hadn't asked that question? How many people were going to be uncomfortable for the 3 meals? And the 3 meals were very extensive, right? Because we had the private chef for each one of them. And then, so we had celiac disease. We had someone who had just had bariatric surgery. We had someone who had a dairy issue as well as didn't eat pork. And then we had somebody who didn't have any red meat. And then we had me and someone else who were like very easy. And it was just like, whatever, like we're going to be served. But truth be told, like I'm not a big fan of seafood. I just didn't want to like add my own thing to it. So it was quite complex, so to say. And even working, I had hired a chef who was very much into like farm to table. She's known for her vegan specialities. But even her, she was like, oh my goodness, like I'm not a nutritionist. How do I deal with someone who has like, you know, who had just had bariatric surgery?
So, I mean, and granted, it's a small size group and 80% makes it sound, you know, but it is. I mean, even for a group of 6 to 7 people, that's challenging trying to figure something out to eat for these meals.
Absolutely. So one of the things I decided to do was that for snacks or anything that I was going to go out above and beyond and do, it was going to be gluten-free. Like I didn't have the mental capacity to do gluten-free and like gluten. It was, nope, we're all going to eat the same way. And so that was like a really big awareness for me of like how difficult it is, especially with people who have celiac disease, to really just manage that.
Yeah. And it's really focusing in on it because wheat is hidden in a lot of different things. Gluten is. Yeah.
It's in everything, basically.
Yeah.
And
so
I was going to say, like, even when we were grocery shopping, right? Like, I only trusted the brands that said, like, on it, gluten-free. Like, I even mentally or from a time perspective didn't want to get into the fine details of everything. And I even got an app for allergies to look up, okay, if it took a picture of this, it would tell me if I could have it or not. Or like,
right.
If I could have it or not.
Right. So your 3 meals, those were dinner or what were those 3 meals?
Lunch and dinner.
Okay. So it was just one day coaching thing or?
No, it was 4 nights, 5 days.
Oh, wow.
And I was responsible for the first night. And what we did was like a charcuterie platter of like 3 boards. And then I was responsible for the breakfast on the way out. But everything else in between was the chef. And then if I did snacks on top of that, then that was
Gotcha. Wow. So that was a lot more than just 3 functions too, right?
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely quite a bit, because even if I like think back to my conference and event days, sometimes you don't even get all 3 of those meals, and then they don't even ask us, right? And so some of the women that attended, they are, international speakers, so they're on the road quite a bit. And because this was my experience, because I know you, we actually had the conversation of how many people actually ask you. And one of them was specifically telling me that, that she has had clients ask, but then she's gotten forgotten in the execution. So that made her feel even worse.
Right. And as a speaker, and it kind of happens to me as well, as a speaker on this topic, we often forget about, and the planners forget about adding that thing in there, adding our needs into that. I actually put it in my riders to say, hey, you will, feed me this. But one of the things too is that I a lot of times share with planners too, is if you're feeding your volunteers or your AV techs, that's an important other level of people that you need to pay attention to.
I mean, I think everybody right now, it's really around inclusivity. It's really around feeling seen and heard. To me, from a sales perspective, it comes back to retention. If I go to an event and, for example, one of those or 2 of those attendees were not taken care of for that time, why would they want to invest their money again with me?
Right.
And I think that's really the conversation that needs to be had. It's not just around comfort and inclusivity. It's around attendee retention.
And that's huge. And I think, and employee retention, right? Because if you're doing this for a CEO executive retreat or the C-level suites of your company, that's even more important too.
Oh my goodness. Like I couldn't even imagine, right? Like those are the big decision makers, and they're the people in charge of how their teams are then feeling. And so if they're not feeling seen and heard, then what energy are they bringing to the people below them?
Right. Exactly. So what did you learn, working with that caterer? I mean, she wasn't familiar with the bariatric. And I always say, hey, reach out to that attendee and ask some questions.
That's what I did. And I ended up showing her the entire menu. And the irony of the situation is the attendee had said she approved the entire thing. And I was like, to me, I'm like, whoa, that was fast. But what happened was on site, she ended up talking to the chef herself and saying, hey, actually, no, I can't have these things. And luckily enough, the alternative had been seafood. I didn't just go with vegetarian because I'm like, vegetarian is too simple. It's too basic. It's too easy. Like, I want these people to feel abundant and wealthy, right? Like I want them to feel seen and have an incredible experience. And there's so much you can do with seafood, right? And so luckily those women were able to have seafood. And then luckily this woman also was able to, because it's not fatty, right? It's very lean. She was able to like do a lot with on the fly. And so I was very appreciative to her. And because the attendee was speaking to her, she was very welcoming. And our group was actually, welcoming to and receiving of their ideas as well. So the energy was really good. But I will say, like, during the process, it wasn't the easiest. I would say out of everything that I was dealing with, that was the hardest portion of it. I'm glad I spent my time and attention, but I will tell you, Tracy, I wish I had someone like you interfacing for me. I wish I didn't have to spend my time and energy on that. I wish I could have said, okay, these are the things I desire. Have somebody go out to the group and say, what are the allergies? And then for you, someone like you to go back and deal with the chef and like the labeling and getting everything done for me, that would have been an investment worth my time.
Well, and that's one of the biggest challenges because I just came from an event as well. And I know actually a couple of events. And one of the planners is like, oh, well, we ordered gluten-free. There should be gluten-free. And I said, there is gluten-free, but the labeling is incorrect. And I'm working on a downloadable to give to people who sign up for my newsletter. It's follow-up, say, hey, you've got this, but who do you have on your team that's following up to make sure that's going to be happening?
And you're talking about like that second set of eyes or quality assurance, right? And back in the day in my 20s, when I also did planning, you have to have a team who is in the know of all of these things. And then they have that like checklist to go through, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to know what you learned about different dietary restrictions doing this.
I learned that you can't assume that nobody has a dietary restriction. First of all, in this day and age, it's just insensitive to assume that people don't have their own challenges and issues. And now people are getting more comfortable talking about it. And if you actually say you care about your people, like this is a conversation that has to be had, even though it's a lot more work, in the long run, it's going to pay dividends. And so if this is something that you don't have the capacity to do, hire for that job, because it's not something that should be overlooked. And what I also realized is that as the population is aging, my clients are all, 40 to 55 years old. And so we are becoming a lot more in tune with our bodies and our needs. We are respecting it, right? Mm-hmm. So, if we have dairy, for example, that could be inflammation and bloating, and then we can't sleep. And then the next day is completely off. And, our bodies are a temple. And I think that food has to be paid attention to.
Right. Exactly. And there are definitely more and more people that are paying attention to what they're eating. And it's the time for purposeful food and beverage. Like they want to make sure that the food that they're eating, majority of 50, I think it was a 52% that majority of people want to pay attention to what they're eating and making sure that the food is doing something for them besides making it their bodies worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have so much awareness around different types of illnesses, and a lot of them come back to what we're putting in our body, right?
Yep.
And, if we desire to live longer and be healthier, then this is something that we have to pay attention to from a much earlier age, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah. And just on a personal note, I am 0.2 of a point from being diabetic. And I am reaching out to see a diabetic nutritionist. And I called my insurance company. And because I'm not on a major medical plan like I had in my old corporate America,
wow.
They're like, oh, well, that's about weight loss and weight gain, and we don't cover that. I'm like, no, it's about potential diabetes and curbing this. And she's like, oh, no, we don't cover anything that has to do with that. And I'm like, so you want to focus on me giving me the drugs after the fact, if I get diabetes or I, do this instead of helping me solve that problem from the get-go. And I think that's a completely different way off topic conversation, but it is the way a lot of our society is based on, is solving it after the problem.
Absolutely. And and that's, I'm not going to go down that.
Yeah. We won't do that. No. Okay. So and there's some personal information about me in there. So I am working on it. But so working with that chef, and so it wasn't a caterer, but it was a private chef.
Yeah, not a caterer. So because of the level of the event that I wanted my clients to experience, it's all in the name, right? It's abundant and wealthy AF. So food for me was something that I was not going to skimp on, because as my father would say, food and booze is what everyone remembers. So this was a dry event. There was no alcohol, but I desired every single meal to be extremely memorable. And that's exactly what ended up happening, because there was so much quantity of it, yes, which is important, but the quality of it was there. And she had presented such a unique menu I hadn't seen. We had edible flowers with lunches and dinners. You know what I mean? It was, and everything was made from scratch. It was fresh. And so that to me was something in my budget, I made sure whatever it was going to be, I was going to take care of it.
Okay, so jumping backwards a couple of years from your planning days, how would you apply what you did there and what you learned to planning an event with more than 8 people in it?
I would put this in registration. I would put this in pre-sales. I would put this in Saviors. That's where I'm doing it now. Actually, I'm going to Greece next year. And so I want to know the information immediately, because that's going to then impact who I'm going to hire. And I want to work with somebody who is easy to work with. So I'm going to hire for that. I'm going to hire for people with this experience of having a diverse group and knowing how to feed them. And so I would be looking for that even at that grand scale. So what does that mean? The venue, because typically the venue provides the catering for larger events. that is what I would be looking for. I wouldn't only be looking for the room blocks. I wouldn't only be looking for the space. I wouldn't only be looking for the AV. I wouldn't like food, I think would go up way higher than that. And how are they going to support me on site? And I think that is a question that I would be asking. And if they're like, what do you mean? Well, red flag right there.
Right, exactly.
I want to hear from the venue, they're going to have proper labeling. I want to have, a quality assurance check. I want to have, they have maybe a dedicated area where they're going to create these, these meals for the people who have, challenges with, their dietary.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for.
Well, and I had a gentleman email me. He took one of my courses recently, or a workshop, 3.5-hour workshop. And he's like, he sent me an email. I'm already implementing some of these things, and these are things I'm getting pushed back on. And one of the things that I educate on is, on a banquet event order, they spell out, hey, this is what's going to be on the buffet, right? And then at the bottom, they typically put 25 vegetarians, 10 gluten-free, and whatever, but they don't tell you what they're going to serve them. It's chef's choice, basically. And he's like, no, I want you to tell me what you're serving. I want you to spell it out. They're like, we won't do that. I'm like, why not?
And I had that same experience and I pushed back.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with your own courage, right? And sometimes when we're planning these much larger experiences, we don't have the time and energy to do that. So then it's like, okay, well, we need somebody on our side to take care of this, because imagine now, let's say 25% of the meal orders are now these special meals. Well, what do those 25% represent, Tracy?
New residual income. Or
exactly.
Yeah.
So if I'm not protecting that income, right, then that's a big red flag. Mm-hmm. That means like that there's someone who has to specialize in this now. And this reminds me very similar of hiring somebody who does either hybrid or virtual events. That's not something now that people are throwing on planner's plate. It's like, no, that's a specialization. So we're going to add a line item in our budget for somebody to manage that. And so I truly believe this is the same thing. It has to be managed in that.
I agree. And because it does take a lot of extra effort to make sure that it's happening. And when you're talking to as the staff, the serving staff, right? Because you're dealing with the back of the house. You're dealing with the back of the house when you're ordering the food. But then again, following up and making sure the servers, who are the individuals interacting with your customers, understand what they're doing.
Absolutely. And so what you're really talking about training, right? And this ongoing training. And so this reminds me of a colleague I think we both had, Jill Chartier. I think that's what she did when she went into a venue. She was front of the house, she was sales. And what she did with her and her team is she went to the back of the house and they learned everything about the kitchen. And that is how she ended up growing that venue's business, like I think 2 or 3x. Because when the sales staff can speak intelligently to food and beverage, well, things are getting done faster. We're not now adding another person in the mix and the sales cycle is prolonged.
Right. And I think that can go along with a caterer, a hotel, a convention center, and especially, and just jumping on that convention center side, because it's typically a separate company, right? Then the building salesperson, it's a whole nother separate contract. So learn what your team can do, for sure.
I mean, ultimately, like it's about driving business, right? And especially if you have local clients who are coming to you, why wouldn't you want to lock that in year after year? You've done the experience of a lifetime, then you don't even have to think about that revenue.
Right, exactly. Now, these lessons learned that you did with this particular, how can you apply that to your customers did you embed what you learned into your sales coaching weekend?
So I am the type of coach or consultant that I will always share everything that I'm learning. That's a part of the benefit of working with me is there's no fence around my intellectual property and then what I'm teaching other people. It's very fluid because I'm always learning and we should all be expanding. That's my true belief. So of course I shared that 80% of us had some sort of dietary restriction. And if we aren't thinking about that, right? And a handful of clients already in that room already run retreats or are embarking on running retreats. And so that's a missed opportunity for me not to be able to share that and how that had to be brought in way earlier in the process, in the sales process, basically, like in pre-sales. That's where it really should be brought in.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm teaching meeting planners as well, is that it should be on your RFP, right? And
1,000%.
1,000%. And I was chatting with a client and they were hesitant to put some of these stipulations on caterers that they were potentially hiring. And another food service provider said, it's their job as a food service provider. They should know what they're serving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not until we all rise up and demand it that things are going to change. And I know, being an event planner, like, we just have so much on our plate and it's, oh my God, I can't handle another thing. Right. And we're like the people in the hospitality industry, we care about helping and serving, and we have a certain type of personality. That's why we're so great in the hospitality industry. But there's certain things that have to change and we have to rise up against that. Right. This I truly believe is one of them.
Yeah. And it's okay. So let's talk personalization as well, because this is, there's my little skateboard that I won last week. Personalization, and when you're doing sales is very personal as well, because you need to know who's at the table, right?
Well, especially prospecting. Like, this problem that's happening online and happening everywhere is creating content is not just sales. That's actually marketing, right? Like, if you're having a conversation, you need to have done the research of who you're talking to. And this is what's going on online, is people aren't doing these things and then they're wondering why they can't close high ticket. That's a part of it, right? So selling an event is high ticket sales. That ultimately is what a conference, right? It's a couple $1,000s. It's not always a expense that has to be had as an attendee, right? So think about it like that.
That's true. Yeah. And I mean, but that brings up two stories that I've shared before, but I think is really important to think about. My friend David does sales in a completely different vertical, but he had found he got a new client and heard this man could be a little bit difficult.
Okay.
And he ended, after talking to me, he decided to, because he did lunch and learns with all of his clients, he decided to get the menus from the restaurant, saying, hey, do you have a gluten-free menu? Do you have a vegan menu and such? And he ended up sending those menus to them. And one of this new client is like, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to order something that meets my dietary needs. I'm used to eating iceberg lettuce while everyone else eats something else. And so that actually helped bond him to that new client.
You're talking about building rapport. You're talking about allowing your clients to be seen and heard and valued. Because if nobody's ever done that for him, now all of a sudden this is the first person that's doing that. You better believe now he's standing out in front of everybody else.
Right. Exactly. I mean, because and continuing that relationship and thinking about how much more money he could potentially make with that. It is his end goal, but that's not the goal of doing that. It's making sure that he feels included.
But that's relationship selling.
Right.
This is my secret power that I teach everybody, right? People do business with people they like. It's that simple. Especially when it's high ticket, if you're paying more attention, if you get back to your clients immediately, if they feel safe when something is going down and you're going to have their back, and this is already happening in the pre-sales process, your contract is always going to be available to you, right?
Yeah.
Like, the sale will always be there. It's not a question that they're looking and searching for somebody else.
Right. Well, and it kind of reminds me to our friend Liz King, right? Years ago, she wrote a blog post, I was turning off my fan, about pricing, right? And increasing her pricing. And she increased her pricing and one of her clients left but then a year later came back because they realized the personalization and the focus that Liz gives to designing her events. It didn't have to necessarily do around food, but it was that expertise that Liz provides for her clients.
Absolutely. And it's the same reason why people are spending $10,000 plus with me per contract, right? Because it's not a big quantity game for me, right? It's quality. So it's the same exact thing. If we think about it from the bigger purpose, the understanding of what this event is meant to do in our business, because typically all of these conferences are revenue generating events. That's be wise to what's going on here, that we're not just doing it for fun, right? We're doing it to bring people to do business, right? Exhibitors are being seen, right? We have the sponsors, we have the speakers, and everyone's looking for opportunities to sell. So if we take it from that perspective of the long game, and how can we do better, and how can we allow this to be a safe place for our attendee? Well, they're all going to come back.
Right. Exactly. And the other story I have too is about, and I think I shared this a couple of weeks ago, but one association, and a lot of these conferences are held by associations.
Yes.
There are corporate planners out there that are doing events for their corporate clients, but associations host a lot of them. And one planner said to me and my friend Tyra Warner, hey, one of our attendees, one of our members has an allergy to pepper. And my executive director says she doesn't want to accommodate them because she doesn't think that's real. And I said to Tyra, talked the legal aspect of it. And I'm like, well, does her money matter to your association? Does her membership fees, does her participation in your board or your committees matter to you? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, then what's the question? Why,
That's exactly it. What are we really talking about here? And so a lot of what I hear is like, this is just so much more work.
Right.
And that is the wrong thing to be looking at here.
Right. Exactly.
Because
what should we be looking at?
We should be understanding who are the people that we're talking about, the humans. Let's humanize this process. These aren't robots we're trying to feed here, right? These are valued customers that we are trying to sell not only this event, we probably are trying to sell sponsorships to. We're also trying to sell maybe our digital products to them. We're also trying to sell ad. So now it's really like not even a conversation. It's non-negotiable to hire someone like you to take care of this if the real pain point is, I don't have time to do this.
Right.
Because the cost of hiring you is well worth the investment of that recurring revenue that's going to come back by treating this person like a real human being.
Okay, everybody, I did not pay her to say that, but I appreciate it.
No, I mean, this is the reality of the situation. They're not running events for fun.
Right, right, exactly. We're running event. If we did, I don't know how many events we would have because my hair is gray from that. Look at some planning events. Yeah,
would be running one a year.
Exactly. So Lynn Wellish is always here. She's my tried and true. Loves your passion about this.
Thank you for joining, Lynn. This is a really serious conversation, and I was only able to understand it when I was on the other side, right? And can you imagine? So the ticket for this event was $5,000, and so can you imagine if one of those people, like, all they had to eat was just vegetables the entire time? They're not going to be excited to come back, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly. And in your sales teaching that I've learned from you too is like using this as an opportunity to set yourself apart. Talk about that.
That's exactly it. Humanizing relationship sales, making people feel seen, heard, valued. That is a sales differentiator, right? It's not about quantity. And how many people on the internet are all around like, I have 800 clients and I have this $7 million launch and all the things. Well and true, but then you go into it and what is the retention of those people? That's why they're hunting all the time. That's why they're spending all this money trying to acquire customers, because they're not focused on the back end of keeping their customers. And that is the secret, guys. Especially in this turbulent economy that we're in. And I quote that because I truly believe sales is a mindset. And so if you're able to rise to that and differentiate yourself, you can still sell. There are always people looking to solve problems. So if we take it from that perspective of how can we better serve the people that we have versus always going out to hunt for new business, I think we're going to meet our sales goals.
Right. Exactly. Now, do you have the woman with the bariatric? And so she got that experience of chatting with the chef and working through that. What was her feedback at the end?
She loved that the chef was able to make it happen for her. And so like the chef, even for one meal, she had chicken from us going out right when the event had started, and we had kept it in the fridge. And I purposefully told her, keep that in the fridge. Because a part of like her bariatric surgery is that they cut off 80% of her stomach. So she can't actually eat a lot. She needs a high protein diet, but it needs to be proteins that are not fatty. So for example, the night that she had to have that, she got rid of the short rib. And then that chicken was then made in the same way that the short rib was made. So then she felt like excited, right? Because she had that same experience, but it just was the meat that she could eat.
That's awesome. And that reminds me of an event that I went to, an author's dinner years ago for Kim Severson's book. And it was 9 different courses, like, because it was 9 different menu items that were talked about in the book. And it was $100 ticket, or, and I'm like, I want to go to this. And it was at a restaurant, and I called them and they're like, okay. And I walked in the door and I had I had appetizers, and then I had 9 different courses that met my needs while sitting at the table with the author. Yeah.
That's incredible. But what you did there was you took ownership, right? Mm-hmm. Used to going into places and having to take ownership. I think what needs to change is like that I was the one able to like jump in and say, hey, how can I help? Because the chef was, having a little bit of a meltdown around like, how I'm not a nutritionist. What do I do? And I was like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. It's fine. But I'm just thinking about like, imagine if I had that earlier in the sales process, right? And I could have told her, hey, this is what we're going into. Let's design it from that perspective moving forward.
Right. Well, and they don't need to freak out, because she knew in her toolbox or in her pot of skill sets as a chef, she knew what to do. She with some little bit of guidance. Yeah.
Yeah. She absolutely knew. And that is a conversation to talk about, like trusting our highest self, right? Trusting that we have everything we need to figure it out. Like we're smart enough, we can do this. And that's why for me, I didn't freak out. Like I was like, okay, well, let's just problem solve, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So going forward, what questions would you want to now ask to these chefs, about this?
Well, luckily, say this event doubled in size, say we went 20 people next year. I think I would have to have conversations around the diversity that can be provided for vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, all of these things, having that experience, right? Because one of the things that was beautiful was that even though it was maybe a pescatarian meal, it was still made in the same essence and savory flavors, for example, as the meat dishes.
Okay.
So I don't want them to just have pasta. I don't want them to just have, the iceberg lettuce, whatever. I want it to be that same experience. And I want somebody who has the knowledge, but also like who desires having my business. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is coming down to. Like if venues who are saying like, no, I'm not going to work with you on that. That's just saying like, I don't value you as a customer.
Yeah, I was recently at a convention, and I heard this third party, but somebody said, yeah, no, we're over these dietary restrictions, so we're not going to accommodate them in our events, right? And
then I'm not going to go to those events.
Exactly. And how many people are you going to, and actually at a different event, I was at that same one, I asked a server, I'm like, hey, do you know if that's gluten-free? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And they never came, I'll go check. They never came back.
Coming down to showing. That's what you're saying, right?
Yep. And that caterer's name was all over that event. And I'm like, now I know who not to hire. Because even their banquet captain could not answer the question.
And this just goes to show, like, and I understand, like, in this industry specifically around catering and, like, it's not like, you don't always have the benefit of having a team that's, been there for years.
Especially in this day and age, yeah.
No. And so, but this comes into your values. And what's the values of the CEO of any of these companies that care about? It's revenue, right? Where is it that they have to invest internally to fix these problems? And I think that is, if people this year, I've been hearing a lot of like, oh no, we're going to just do the same old. We're not going to maybe invest in doing bigger events, or we're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. Well, okay, if you're not going to put that money externally to get new lead generation, can you bring it internally? And how do you increase, your not your recurring revenue, but your retention rate? So that training, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah. And actually, I'm putting a proposal together today for a company and their business resource group. And that's all about diversity, equity, inclusion, to talk about food and beverage inclusion and what that means to the bottom line, right? Because it's retention. Yeah.
And a big one that's coming up, actually, and I think you and I had this conversation, but why I'm bringing it up, my husband recently, like 9 months ago, decided he's not going to drink anymore. And so, especially when you go to these business conferences, drinking is like how you do business. So I think there even needs to be like different conversations around the diversity of people and how they're doing business around alcohol, and that there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh, a whole nother, I went to a bar at one of these conventions and the guy's like, oh, let me buy you a drink. Cause we've been chatting earlier in the day. I'm like, okay, I'll have a water. And he's like, really? That's all you're going to have? And I'm like, yeah, I don't drink alcohol. And he's like, well, what's your vice? And I'm like, blueberries? Like, why does it matter to you that I'm having a glass of water, or that I don't drink? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think more and more people are starting to talk about how they don't drink alcohol and like the positive benefits of it. And it's not like they had any addiction problems. It's exactly the dietary restrictions. Like their gut just couldn't handle it. Like it could be just as simple as that.
Yeah. Or just like me, just decide, I don't want to spend the money on it anymore. Right. Or I just don't want to drink. So yeah. And it comes down, and this is very sad. I'm going to bring the story up. The bride, I don't know if you saw it because you're in Canada, but the bride just got married this past weekend or recently, and she was on the golf cart with her husband driving away from the reception, and a 24-year-old hit their golf cart and killed her.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the girl was drunk, and after the police officer checked on the people in the golf cart, he's like, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much alcohol have you had? And he's like, an 8. She answered an 8. I'm like, so she was really intoxicated. But this woman, 3 hours after she got married, was killed. And not that was right. I mean,
like,
right. Yeah. So, and I mean,
and understand.
And who knows where that woman was drinking, if she was drinking at home or if she was drinking because she wasn't at the wedding. But but thinking about the wedding aspect and
how fast were they driving a golf cart to kill another person in a golf cart?
Oh, no. The woman was in a car and she was driving double the speed limit and hit the golf cart.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And not to be a Debbie Downer in that. I mean, it's horrifying that this happens. And she died 3 hours after she was married. But this woman
talk about so I could never understand why people like golf for my life. I couldn't understand it. And then I finally went to a golf tournament. I'm like, oh, there's alcohol there. And so that calls that attention, right?
Yeah. So, well, and they were just using it to get from the event to their house or wherever. But this girl was driving her car down the street. But to me, it's like, who was monitoring her? If she was at a bar, did that person overserve? So as a restaurant owner, or if she was at an event, are your servers trained to monitor how much somebody's had to drink so that they're not getting in a car? Right. So those are some other aspects of.
But even the event organizer, that's on their liability too. Right? And so taking a look at that.
Right.
But this is a whole nother conversation now.
Right. Yeah, totally. A whole nother conversation. But it brings into light, heavy drinking elsewhere as well. So, okay. Well, I am so excited that that I had you on here to talk about this because, like you said, this was your first time really focusing on this and wanting to elevate this experience for people.
And I must say, I have to thank you. It's because I know you that this was such a high priority because of it. In the past, it's no, this is just what I'm choosing. My wedding 8 years ago, I didn't ask for dietary restrictions. I was just this is what we're serving. Right. And so that goes into what about people who do social events, right?
Yeah, exactly. And who are you hiring to do that? Who's your caterer? How are you managing it? And especially at your wedding too, I always make fun of the 4 weddings and a funeral. Do you want that to be your wedding? Is you killed somebody at your wedding because you weren't willing to accommodate their food allergy?
I think it's really just like what you're doing is bringing this massive awareness to even having this conversation. And then, just like the use of social media and the internet, we just have to change and evolve in the ways that we're doing our business, right? It shouldn't be viewed as like, oh my God, another thing to do. It's okay. Well, if I think of these people as human beings and I value them as a customer, well, then this is something that just has to be taken care of.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So 2 final questions.
Yeah.
1, what is your favorite food and drink?
The first thing that came up in my brain was ketchup chips.
What?
Yeah.
What is a ketchup chip?
So in the States, you guys don't have it, but there's a chip that is flavored ketchup. And so now they even have like extreme ketchup flavors. And those are my favorite, the brands that have that. Yeah. So if we see each other at an event, I'll bring you a bag of ketchup chips.
Okay.
And drink, I love a really nice fresh hibiscus tea, like a cold hibiscus tea. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I had that actually at the retreat, and so that was really nice. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. I just have to pipe in. Martha McGowan, I'm going to tag you on this thing, but your roommate freshman year in college at NC State, she loved ketchup. So we need to find Julie and give her some ketchup chips. She would put ketchup on everything.
Oh my God. It's a different experience to have it like powdered on a chip or powdered like on popcorn is amazing too.
It's just tomato flavoring, right?
It's just a different level. Like you're not used to it. It's hard to understand. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But I'll let you experience it. It's incredible.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Something new to try. All right. And then my last question, which I ask everybody, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean to you?
I mean, be asked what it is that you can eat. How about that?
That's simple. Yeah.
It's honestly very simple.
Yeah. Well, Shannon, I'm going to put up here your LinkedIn profile. Is that how everybody can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Clapper. I'm on TikTok. I'm on all.
All right.
Oh my goodness. Have you not heard about Clapper?
No.
So Clapper is the US-based TikTok because there's all this drama about TikTok shutting down the Chinese company.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Something that I'm not on.
Okay. Don't add to your plate.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody get in touch with Shannon if you want some more know-how on how to grow your revenue with some very personalized sales tactics. So thank you, Shannon. And I really appreciate you sharing this experience with me and my listeners of what you experience planning an event with 80% of your attendees having a dietary need. So
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Everybody, again, this is Food Allergy Awareness Month and Celiac Disease Awareness Month. So stay tuned all month for tips and tricks on how to feed people who have dietary restrictions or to feed yourself. All right? Until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.